Okay, welcome to this week's weekly Chen chat. So what's the date today? The 1st of the 9th, September the 1st, basically, 2025. So we'll just wait for a few people to get connected. I'll turn my phone off, which is always handy. Jean's going to check the sound, which will be good. Okay, let's go to comments. There we go. Set this up. So firstly, for all the people listening to this on catch up, you may have been someone that we sent rather a lot of emails to over the weekend. Basically, we've been upgrading our email system for the last week because we've got a lot of emails, and obviously the system's struggling to keep going with the demand. So we thought we'd hey, hi, good to see you, Ashley. So basically, we've been doing a bit of an email upgrade, and that turns out that there are 32,000 emails to migrate from our old system to our new system. So you can imagine 32,000 emails is quite a lot to move, and associated folders and all that kind of stuff. So it's taken us quite a long time to do that, probably about a week. And it would seem that the new email system got confused with where we were as part of that migration process, and then decided to send out lots of emails, the same emails, to lots of you. So if anyone's had about 30 emails of the same thing, apologies from our perspective. We have fixed the problem now, hopefully, behind the scenes. And that should be resolved and sorted. So Jane can hear my dulcet tones fine. That's good. Good to hear you. So Ashley's here, Luke's here. Good to see you, Luke. Thanks for joining. So yeah, so we're just talking about emails, basically. Anyone that's had lots of emails from us, obviously press delete. We have sent an email out with a 20% off code on for the people that we've annoyed. So we do apologise for that from our perspective. Okay, so this week, so what we're going to talk about this week. So this week is drugs, basically. So we're kind of going to do like a 5-parter with Chen. So we're going to talk about drugs and how drugs affect people, obviously from a kind of psychological perspective and obviously a spiritual perspective. So we're going to try and cover all of the topics around drugs. This week is going to be the starting week, effectively. So in terms of kind of how drugs or drugs awareness, I suppose, would be probably the right terminology. So why people get into drugs in the first place? Why do they start taking drugs? What kind of leads them into that path? We all know that there are many reasons that people get into drugs, and obviously the sorts of people that we're dealing with on a kind of regular basis are people that are kind of self-medicating generally through some sort of pain, trauma, things they've been through in their life. So we're going to kind of cover drugs and the awareness of it in this particular session this week, and then next week we'll move on to part 2 of that, and obviously Chen will follow that with us. So hi Harmony, good to have you here, and obviously Vanessa's joined as well, which is good. Evening, feels like the evening now. Okay, so really from my perspective, so obviously people are going to listen to this and catch up, so we'll just keep moving forward, and then we'll get Chen to come in. I know that in the past I've spent quite a long time talking from my perspective. Obviously, you guys are here to listen to Chen, really, more than me. So I'm going to kind of whip through my part of it, really, and then obviously we'll get Chen in to give his version and his opinion, of course, because we do need to remember that Chen is a discarnate spirit guide that is outside of our kind of physical space, really. So his observations and understanding of the ways that we do things and why we do things is always going to be slightly distorted from our practical version, because, of course, we are living the physical life, and spirit guides are not living the physical life. And even though they're here to guide us and they're here to kind of provide opinions and obviously work closely with us, they're not the ones having this physical experience. We are. And I do remind Chen that sometimes when I'm aching and struggling to get out of bed and knees are cricking and cracking, because I used to play football a lot in my younger days. So, aging takes a toll on the physical body. And of course, the guides in spirit tend to sometimes forget that we are all actually having this physical life whilst we're kind of working with them hand in hand. And obviously we're working with our guides, with Chen and his team, every single day, 7 days a week. It never stops, even weekends. We've got things to do. There's emergency clearings to do. So we are kind of working in this very intricate and emotionally connected way with our spirit guides. And therefore, of course, they're partly living our life, I guess, through us to a certain degree. But they do tend to forget sometimes that the physical experience is obviously very different to the one that they can remember from the last time they had a physical life. And I do remind Chen of this sometimes, that it's all right for you. You just come in, take over, talk, disappear, and leave me with the physical human part to contend with, really. So let's get back to drugs. That's what we're here to talk about. So core reasons, really. Why do people take drugs, and how do they kind of get into drugs? So let's talk about kind of drugs awareness. So core reasons, I think, from my perspective, probably self-medication is what we definitely hear every single day. Just about every single report we do, or certainly a huge percentage, will talk about someone's experience, generally traumas, things they've been through in their life, things they've been through in their human experience again, and difficult things sometimes to deal with, difficult experiences. You know, lots of people talk about self-medication. So it's emotional relief, I guess, is what we're talking about. People that are self-medicating are kind of finding some sort of emotional relief in the traumas and the pains they're going through. And we all know that we can turn to substance and drugs to kind of get relief really from that. So it could be alcohol. Hi to Pink and Martha. So it could be alcohol. Yep, you're right. Also, of course, it could be any other type of drugs. And of course, we need to kind of throw into the mix, I think. We've got recreational drugs, which we know about, cocaine, weed, those sorts of things. But we also tend not to think about pharmaceutical drugs. And of course, pharmaceutical drugs are still drugs. They still change the chemistry. They still change the biology, really, of our bodies. So when we're taking pharmaceutical things, they're still changing our brain, our mind, our emotions. So they have the same effect as recreational drugs, even though they're obviously monitored and tested in different ways. So drugs of any kind, for me, really come into the same kind of category. Anything that you put in your mouth, that you swallow, or you inject, of course, into your bloodstream, that changes your perception, changes your mental state from a drugs or recreational perspective, is the same thing, really. And I think that's my sort of take on it. And I guess we do that to do things like it sort of blunts anxiety. People that have got low mood can turn to recreational drugs and drugs to feel better, or whether that be pharmaceuticals or recreational. And then people generally masking trauma, I guess. And then other people talk about loneliness. We have a lot of emails coming through to us talking about how lonely people feel. And I think the spiritual path really can be quite a lonely place. I remember Chen telling me years ago, you know, this is your path, you need to walk it. If you're going to walk it, it's only your path. So it is quite a lonely place to be. I think this is where we kind of need other people, and we call it our tribe, I think, to kind of, we need to find people like us that we can connect with and we can talk to and we can experience things. And that kind of makes things easier, really, from that perspective. We'll say hi to Mimi. Good to see you. And Alriza, good to have you here. I know that you join quite often. Also, Ashley is talking about anxiety medicines. Same type of thing. I think anything that you put in your mouth that changes how you feel is a substance, is a drug in one way or another, really. Luke's talking about DMT and magic mushrooms to induce spiritual experiences. Still chemistry changing, I guess. It still comes under the same sort of things because it's going to create some sort of euphoric feeling and emotional relief. So the other thing, I think, why do people get into drugs? So maybe curiosity and sensation seeking, novelty, fun, identity and rebellion kind of come up for me, really. I know that when I was younger, the friendship group I have, people try different things, people do different things, and certainly in your early years, it's very easy to kind of get persuaded to do things that you kind of know aren't right to do, but you want to try them because you're curious. And I think that is part of human nature, really. And I'm pretty sure by the time most people get to kind of, you know, their later years, 40s, 50s, you've kind of tried different things, done different things. Some things you look back on, I think, okay, it was fun at the time. I wouldn't really want to repeat that again. Other times you look back and think it caused me a lot of problems in my life and I wish I never did it. And again, we do get a lot of people that use ayahuasca, that go off to do ayahuasca ceremonies and retreats. And they come back with attachments and problems and intrusive thoughts, that type of thing, because there's probably not a huge amount of spiritual protection overlaid into that experience. And again, we see this on a weekly basis. So other things, other reasons why people get into drugs, really. So performance is something I didn't really think about too much, and we kind of covered that earlier when we were talking. So performance enhancing stimulants. People that are on long shifts can take drugs to keep them going, to see them through a shift at work. Obviously, athletes can use them to increase their performance. So again, we know that athletes can get kind of encouraged or persuaded to go into using drugs for some sort of performance enhancement to give them the edge on someone else. And of course, sedatives. Lots of people have sleeping problems. And one of the things that happens generally when you can't sleep is you then look to a sedative to kind of help you sleep. And there's different types of sedatives. Some people use alcohol, obviously red wine, that type of thing can be quite good to help you sleep, to kind of bring you down. Other people drink hot chocolate. Some people have a bath and find a little ritual or routine. I find reading a book sends me to sleep quite quickly. If I sit outside, start reading, I can feel my kind of eyelids dropping quite quickly. So different people use different things, but of course drugs can be used to work for that kind of range of performance issues from that perspective. And then we've got social factors, I guess. So nightlife, people go out clubbing, pubbing, things become trendy. You know, people around you that are doing drugs that are having a really good time. And we know that, you know, people that take drugs obviously have this kind of euphoric feeling they can lose themselves for a bit, lose their identity for a bit, do and say things that they probably otherwise wouldn't do or say if they weren't taking drugs. So people can change personality, and that can become quite addictive, obviously, for some people, really. So then we can move on to kind of medical pathway. So why do people take drugs for medication? So prescribed painkillers, sedatives, stimulants, those sorts of drugs can be used short term for help. But of course, they then can be used longer term, and they become part of like a misuse cycle, I guess, where people continue to take these sort of prescribed painkillers and sedatives because they've got injuries or problems, or they can't sleep. And then that becomes a routine and a ritual, and that can obviously go on for quite a long time. So the medical pathway is also a kind of a gateway into doing drugs and becoming dependent upon drugs too, really. And then if we think about life stressors, just the stress of life, really, we all know life can be difficult. Chen always says to me, actually, that having a human life, you know, he says people don't come to planet Earth to have a holiday, basically. We're all incarnating on planet Earth to work. We've all come here to evolve, to learn, to progress our own soul, our own spirit, and then to kind of progress ourselves for humanity, our species. So we're all kind of connected intricately, energetically, and we're all having different experiences. And I guess all of those experiences are kind of being baked into that pie, really. So from a psychological perspective, there's a lot of things that are kind of going on. And generally, life can be difficult. Most people have money problems, housing strains, conflict in their families, bereavement quite often, isolation. So there's lots of reasons that people would turn to drugs, and obviously find drugs kind of helpful from that perspective. But of course, we know that when you move into a cycle of drug abuse, whether that be conventional drugs, recreational or medical, it can be quite difficult to get out of that loop. And this again seems to be very common from our perspective. Again, most of the client bookings, I guess, we have that we're doing on a daily basis, I read every one. So whatever the client writes as their description, they get read before we do the session. And so often it's the same types of things where they find themselves in a difficult position or spot, and they've taken some drugs or done some sort of drug misuse. Then they end up with problems, and then they're having intrusive thoughts. Then they kind of have broken their field and they've picked up attachments, whether that be spiritual or entity attachment. So it's a very common kind of theme. And that's what I think we're here to trying to do. We're trying to help people to kind of learn about the spiritual aspects of some of these things, and then to kind of help break that cycle whereby we can intervene, perform our interventions, and kind of take that person away from the addictive issues around drugs, hopefully, so they can start to change and find themselves on a better pathway. But of course, like everything, there's no magic bullet, there's no kind of magic way of doing this. It's always going to be an uphill task for people. So from that perspective, I guess, how does it begin? So people kind of experiment with drugs. Weekends become, you know, a kind of, let's do some drugs on a weekend, have some fun. It can become a coping loop. So people are using drugs to kind of de-stress. But the problem is, of course, with drugs, like everything, the more you take, the more your body becomes used to that. And then you need more and more. So the whole thing is a cycle that's being driven, really, which can be very difficult to break. And of course, it does take a lot of willpower and mental agility to be able to step aside from a kind of cycle that you find yourself in. And certainly as practitioners of this sort of work, we all know that our clients are in some of those difficult spots, really, and they're working through lots of issues in their life. And of course, drugs tends to give them the out for very short term. But of course, there is a financial implication to using drugs because generally they're quite expensive. And of course, it becomes a habitual ritual thing. So it's, there are psychological aspects. And I guess there's a societal part of it too. We know that in society, people find it very difficult to break free of the hold of drugs because, of course, even if you smoke, if we just look at nicotine, it's an addictive drug. If you start smoking when you're 16, 17 at school, it looks quite cool with your friends. By the time you get to 30, you've been smoking for sort of 15, 17 years or something. And then, of course, you start to get some health problems, and it can be quite difficult to stop that addiction. And we know that hypnosis is really good for that type of thing because, of course, we're going to talk to the subconscious aspect and get to the higher self and try and break the loop. But nothing's particularly easy, and I guess everyone has to really want to do things to kind of make that change. So I want to say hi to G&T Sales Group and Thumbelina Tom. Great to have you guys here. So hopefully we're talking about something that probably impacts us all. We all know someone that has addictive problems or addictive personalities, or they're addicted to different things. And, quite often no one looks at why that happens. And obviously we can perform intervention and try and detach things that are encouraging the addictions, but there's always something behind it generally, and it's trying to find what's behind it that is the key from a healing practitioner perspective. And I guess like when we perform interventions, and certainly I know that some of you guys here are SRA practitioners, you'll know yourselves when you work with clients, we can perform an intervention very quickly, but the ongoing aftercare support and recovery and healing is a longer journey, and that can take obviously more time for people really. Okay, so I think that probably covers it really from my perspective. So yeah, awareness. So I've written a few notes, I'm just reading. So awareness, notice to act early, really is what I've written down. Planning days around using, recovering, changing doses, changing frequency, trying to get yourself off things as much as you can. And I think this kind of goes for all drugs, whether they be recreational or pharmaceutical. If you can try to back yourself off anything that's changing your chemistry, then that's probably a good thing really from a health perspective. And there are lots of things that we can talk about from a health perspective that we can do. I've got some kind of little tips and things that I do personally that I probably will share in a different chat, but they are a little bit different from most people's choices. But again, there are lots of things that we can do to look at kind of how we change our health and how we can recover from some of these addictive substances that we find ourselves connected to or addicted to over time. Okay, so I think let's talk to Chen. Just reading my notes here. So has anyone got any questions they want to ask before we move over to Chen? Because obviously once we move to Chen, my eyes are shut, so nothing gets read really from that perspective. I'm sure we've all got friends, family, acquaintances, people we work with that we know that have addictive problems or addictive personalities. And we never really talk to them about why they're addicted to these things. People just tend to look at addiction and not look behind the addiction to find out where that comes from. And there's always some sort of pain, emotional trauma, even with anxiety and those things. Anxiety still is connected to fear and some of those type of emotional problems. So we know that everyone that's in or going through that type of experience, there's some underlying work that needs to be done really to kind of support them and help them and move them through or away from their addiction if we can. But of course, like everything, people need to kind of take it on the chin and put their hand up and ask for help. And I think this is probably what happens for most people. Most people hide their addictions from their friends, from their families, which of course is obviously a very difficult place to recover from when no one knows that you actually have some of these addictions. So Thumbelina Tom's asking, can Chen advise on how to help young people on drugs, alcohol issues? Yeah, good. Okay, that's a good question. So let's get Chen in for a chat and see what he has to say. Just going to set my timer for him a second. Okay, how many drinks can one have before a etheric field gets compromised? That's a really good question, Luke, actually. I guess it's probably different for different people. So, I mean, I drink alcohol. I mean, no secret of the fact that I find it kind of grounds me, it relaxes me. After we've had sometimes got a difficult day with some difficult clients, because we are dealing with some very fringe people that have entity possession problems, and quite often dealing with those sorts of people and clearing those sort of entities can be quite stressful at times. So I find for me, I can have a couple of glasses of wine, has no real effect on me other than make me sleepy. Jane will notice that I start to snore on the sofa probably and get a quick elbow to wake up if we're watching something. So for me, a couple of drinks doesn't really change my field. It certainly doesn't compromise it. So again, I guess it depends how well protected you are. If you're thinking about spiritual protection, you're keeping your etheric field clear and protected, then smoking, drinking probably shouldn't really have too much effect at all. Of course, if you're doing harder drugs or smoking weed that we know does cause perforations in the field, then depending upon how much of that you do, depends, I guess, how perforated that field becomes. And also, of course, like sovereignty checking. So, you know, I have a ritual every day, wake up, do my sovereignty checks, make sure that I'm clear, there's nothing attached to me. So for me, 99, probably 0.9% of my life is completely sovereign. So only myself protect my energy and protect the field. But for people that aren't doing that or don't understand how to do that, then of course they're probably compromised already, in which case a few glasses of wine or, you know, a couple of joints or something may then cause perforations to the field. So I guess it's quite a subjective question, but it's a good one, obviously. Hi to Tracy, who's just joined. So it's going to hand over to Chen, and we'll get him to see what he wants to talk about from a sort of drugs part one, awareness. So we're talking about awareness today, really, why people start taking drugs, how it starts. So it's kind of like the starting point of someone being addicted, and then we're going to work through that for the next 5 weeks, 5 Mondays, basically, to cover the various different points of drug use and then how we can help to heal people, move them backwards away from drug addiction. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Chen, and I'll catch you guys in a moment. Good day to you all. This is Chen, Andrew's principal guide and surgeon. So first, I'd like to welcome you here to this week's weekly Chen chat. So it's nice to be able to converse again, and I do so look forward to having this opportunity to be able to connect with everyone and have these sorts of conversations, because of course the more we talk about these sorts of topics, the more aware people become, and the more aware people become, then the easier the path of infiltration to create healing. And this is what we're all about, really. We're all about trying to help people in any way that we can. My job as a spirit guide and as a spiritual mentor, really, and teacher, certainly, is to provide guidance. And of course, that guidance comes from a place of love for your species as human beings and for you as people. We love and we connect with you, and the information is given with integrity and honesty from a truthful perspective. So obviously, as a spirit guide, and young Andrew was joking earlier that I have the easy job because I don't have a physical body. And of course, if you think about your spirit guides, they've been with you probably for most of your life. And I wouldn't say the job is particularly easy, because we sit and we watch some of the difficult choices you make, some of the places and the people that lead you into to negative emotional experiences, traumas and pain. And we sit by and we think, no, dear, that was a bad decision, because that bad decision now means we're on this path, and that path we can see come up. So we are able to view your path choices. I mean, obviously you as a human being have choice, you have free will. This is what you have. When you're connected to your spiritual team, your spiritual guidance, and you're listening to us, we're able to converse in the same way, really, that we converse now. So if you're about to make choices that could be negative to you, we would probably guide you in a different way. But at times we do realize, of course, that you are here to have a spiritual experience, and you are here to progress and to learn and to grow as people. And to do that, you have to make mistakes. You have to have negative experiences that may include traumas and pain. But of course, they are choices that you've made yourself. And this is the thing, really, from our perspective. quite often we watch a choice. We may see someone go out to have a night out in their early 20s, and we think they're young, they don't really have a lot of wisdom in this particular life, they're living for the moment, they're on an emotional high, maybe a sexual high, they're enjoying themselves, they're having a great time around other people. And of course, these are circumstances that you've all experienced. Anyone that's had a physical human life will be able to understand what we're talking about. And in those moments of euphoria, whether you have taken substance already, so you could be drunk on alcohol, or you could be high on different drugs, or you could have taken other drugs that have changed your emotional and psychological state. So in those states, of course, you throw caution to the wind and you're having a wonderful time, and you take something that changes your chemistry. And of course, when your chemistry changes, then serotonin generally is dumped into the bloodstream, which is this euphoric hormone for adrenaline. And of course, you feel good, you're having a wonderful time. So doing those sorts of things occasionally is not a problem, of course. It's part of normal human experience. But of course, when people start to experience emotional highs, then the day-to-day life starts to become quite inconsequential to them. They start to find life quite boring, in fact, which would be understandable. When you've been high and you've been at your height and your emotions are running and you're having a wonderful time, or you're dancing and letting yourself go, it's a wonderful experience to have. But you know that in the morning, when you wake up, you're going to feel rather tired and rather beside yourself, because of course all of the energy is gone, the chemistry is changed, and then most people feel slightly tired, down, probably a bit depressed. Obviously, people talk about the hangover the next day, but the hangover essentially is the fact that you've partied hard, you've drunk, or you've taken things that have basically stressed your body, or they've dumped lots of hormone into your bloodstream. And then, of course, you're in the after effects, which can take days. And people that have done harder drugs that cause more serotonin release will know sometimes you feel suicidal for a few days after you've taken some of these drugs like ecstasy, because of course you've changed the chemistry so much in the brain. All of the good hormone has been released into the bloodstream and effectively burnt off. So you're left with a very tired, negative emotional state that can feel very down and depressive. And of course, many people find themselves in this cycle with drugs, because then they want the high again. They want to go back to the time that they're partying and enjoying themselves. Of course, the weekend comes. They then repeat the exercise and take other drugs that give them these emotional highs. So continually swinging from high emotion to low emotion, and lots of adrenaline, lots of energy to no energy, and extreme tiredness. And of course, this is the starting cycle really for most people. But if we think about people that have been through different types of trauma, so PTSD, some sort of abuse, whether that be physical, sexual, mental, emotional, any type of abuse, again, people look for a way out of effectively. And of course, you know that there is no way out really from a conventional conscious perspective. So the only way out in the physical is to find substance that changes how you think and how you feel. And of course, people find themselves on that pathway. They go off and they start to drink alcohol, or they smoke some type of substance that changes the mental state again, and they move themselves into that space. But of course, you know that the more you do that, and for the longer that you do it, the next thing you notice is that you do have an addiction. And this is what happens for most people. Most people that are addicted to drugs, any type of drugs, will tell you they're not addicted, because in their own mind, they think they can stop whenever they want to. But of course, their actions dictate the fact they're not able to stop, because their body has been acclimatized to the addictive substance, and it wants that substance. So you know yourself, if you've been addicted to things, sometimes it's a very physical feeling. The physical body is crying out for that particular substance, even though it's not particularly good from a mental or emotional construct perspective. But the body wants that, and you start to feel ill and tired. And people that have taken drugs for a long time will tell you, if they start to go without the drugs, then they have terrible feelings, they have terrible pains in their body, and they have to go through some sort of rehabilitation to be able to move themselves off completely and do a complete detox. And of course, that's a painful, difficult journey. So many people, I think, find themselves using drugs from an awareness perspective, starting off either recreationally or to mask pain. And of course, these are the two pathways that we see from the spirit guide perspective. And we sit back and we think, oh dear, they're on a certain pathway now. And we can see that pathway is going to go on for a certain length of time, months or years. And at some point, of course, there will be an incident that will happen. So we know from a guide perspective that when you move yourself onto an addictive pathway, part of that journey will either cause you severe physical ailment problems, which will then give you options to stop doing or taking the addictive substances that you're addicted to, or of course something else will happen basically. But at some point, a red flag marker is raised in your life, in your subconscious, and everyone knows when they're doing something that's negative towards their own body, that a time to stop comes up. People that have smoked for years and years eventually realize that when they can't breathe properly and they're not able to cough properly and they're coughing up phlegm and people around them are looking and staring, they realize that this is a time perhaps that the body has reached its end time for that particular substance, or if it's smoking, that particular nicotine. And then of course there's an opportunity to stop if you can. But many people quite enjoy the experience of being addicted to different types of drugs, and therefore they don't stop and they continue along the pathway. And certainly we as spirit guides will sit back and watch, and we fold our arms and we think this could be a long journey. But of course they're going to learn quite a lot about themselves as they go down this addictive pathway. And this was the point of these conversations, really, from our perspective. We wanted to break the whole cycle of drugs into different weeks where we talk about different parts of the journey, because we could cover this in one conversation and one subject. But I think having time to think about and be quite critical about your own life and your friends and your family and people around you gives you more time to consider why people are doing the things they're doing. And again, drugs take away pain generally, or they mask pain, unless they're taken, of course, for sports and people that are looking to exceed their own abilities. But generally, I think most people are taking drugs as a trauma plaster, but all they do, of course, is make their problems worse, as you know. And this is the same for some of the pharmaceutical drugs. Although they can be very helpful in the short term, people become addicted to them. And then, of course, they become quite devastating to the etheric field. And this obviously is what we're moving on to, is that when you ingest something that's quite strong and it has the ability to change your chemistry and your emotional state and parts of your body too, of course, because it's in your bloodstream. So it's going through your filtering system, it's going through your kidneys, it's going through your body. Then obviously there is an element to that which can become quite difficult from a disease perspective when your body is having some of these unclean drugs put through them effectively. And that, of course, is part of the conversation that we also need to consider too, that taking drugs has an effect on the mental state. But of course, the physicality too will be impaired because of that journey. So this is what we tend to think about, but we don't tend to look at why people do these things. And this is what we're quite keen to surface in these conversations, is certainly for practitioners. And I know there are practitioners from the academy here, and you'll know yourselves when you deal with clients, and certainly for those of you that work hand in hand very closely with clients, there is a whole journey that these clients need to be taken on to recover completely. Spiritual clearing or cleansing, bringing them back to sovereignty, is only a small part really of the journey. It's, as Terence used to say, it's the sticking plaster, the paramedic that turns up at a road accident, puts that person in the back of an ambulance, keeps them alive, and then drops them off at the hospital door and says there's a whole raft of work that has to happen now for this person. Our work is done. And this is what we're looking at from a spirit perspective, is we provide an intervention to bring someone back to sovereignty, but obviously they've got all of the problems and issues that they had as the catalyst and the reason they turned to substance and drugs in the first place that hasn't been dealt with. And this is, I think, an extraordinary opportunity for all of you listening to think about your role. Are you someone that can help people in that way? Are you someone that can set up some type of help, whether that be through your websites or your other businesses? Because of course many of you run your own businesses as practitioners, and certainly there's a huge opening, I think, for an ability to connect and talk to a real person, where someone says, the reason I do drugs is because of this is what happened to me. So rather than just a psychological counselling perspective, when someone's brought back to sovereignty, they actually get their own brain back, really, without any interference, and they can start to work through the things that have happened to them in their life and why they made certain choices and where those choices took them. And when they can actually understand the pathway that they've been on, which many people forget, they just look at the here and now, the addictive issues, the traumas and the pain that are still in them today, but they're not able to look at where they came from, really, and go backwards. And of course, a therapist that can offer hypnosis, past life regression, spiritual cleansing and clearing in the way that we do things from a sovereignty perspective. These are huge changes that can affect the psychological aspects of all clients that need help. And of course, this is the part, I think, from my perspective, that's missing from the current medical system. The medical system is dealing with people from a psychological, conventional perspective, no understanding of the spiritual nature of what's going on behind the scenes. So there is a puppet, and we know that with a puppet, there's someone's hand on the top that are pulling those strings, and the puppet's arms and legs are moving up and down, and the head's moving from side to side. But if you're only able to see the puppet, you can't possibly rectify any of the problems with the puppet, because you can't see the puppet master behind the scenes. And this is where we need to connect the spiritual sovereignty conversation with the medical perspective, the mental health perspective, and bring those two together so that there is collaboration. People need to be spiritually cleansed to then work through the traumas and the pain, and then the addictive aspects and the drugs and the things that they're using to cover up the pain, and lead that into the medical aspect of mental health. The whole thing needs to be a pathway and a channel. And this is what we're here to try to do, is to start to collaborate and connect these different organizations, or these different aspects of recovery and healing together. One thing alone only provides a certain amount of progress. If we perform spiritual intervention, that's wonderful. Someone wakes up without any interference spiritually and they feel better, but the problems and the issues that they have and the traumas they have haven't been resolved and dealt with. And if that person is just left to swim in the pond on their own, they still go round and round in circles, even though, of course, the interference may have been stopped and dropped. So we need to get to a place that we can start to look at someone as a person that has spiritual requirements, and they have physical requirements, and there are psychological aspects to that too. And then we need to marry those things up together so that someone starts off, from my perspective as a spirit guide, if I was able to create an organization, I would take someone, the first thing we would do is provide spiritual intervention, clear them spiritually, move them along the pipeline into another room. That room would then have someone in there that could talk to them about the reasons why they're in the situation they're in. So some sort of counseling or conversational aspect, and then move them through that process into, are there medical things that can help? Are there tablets? Are there medications that can help that person with the way they're feeling? Bringing in meditation, keeping hold of sovereignty. And then, of course, there can be different people behind the scenes that specialize in things like PTSD, sexual trauma, sexual abuse, physical abuse. There's a whole raft of things that we could talk about. But if you could see this as a pathway and channel, at the moment, the whole pathway is not connected. It's not connected, certainly from a spiritual perspective, and it's certainly not connected behind the scenes from a mental health perspective in the way that we would wish that to be. So I think we all have this opportunity together to start to be the small cogs in this big system where we actually start to provide the help. And this is certainly where we're looking to drive things, certainly from a Spirit Release Academy perspective, that we start to bring together and collaborate with different organizations that can put structures in place to provide what we would call whole healing for people, spiritual, emotional, and physical, not just one part or the other of that particular sequence. So it's a big journey, but I think it's time to change. And certainly the team that we have in Spirit now that's growing by the week, we have many, many entities working with us now, many of which have never even been documented on planet Earth before. And they're here to make change, and they're here to be part of this transformative progress, really, in your healing as a species, the human species. And of course, it's a monumentally wonderful time to be alive, even though what you see on your media and what you read about may be the opposite. But the truth is, things are really changing quite quickly. And certainly from our perspective, we are trying to connect many, many different types of organizations and people together to provide this journey of healing that people, when they understand it, will race towards. And this, of course, is why we're so keen to train practitioners to understand the first part of the journey. You can't heal anyone that's broken. And if they're broken, they're spiritually broken, because there'll be spiritual interference behind the scenes. And unless you remove the interference, you can't start the journey. You're coming in halfway along the train, and that way it will never work. And this is why a lot of these amazing modalities have been stuck, really, over the past number of years, because they're not looking at some of the initial problems. And this is where we're keen to provide this guidance from a spiritual perspective, but not just to talk about it. We want to show it working. We want to show the efficacy of cleansing and clearing someone spiritually before they start a healing pathway. And this is part of our mission here on this planet at this time. So I will say good day to you all. Hopefully it's been an introduction into the drugs aspect from our perspective, Spirit, and the awareness as to why people find themselves addicted to drugs, why they're on the path that they're on, and why it's so difficult to break. Because when you're so far down the line, you have all of the addictive issues to work through, but if you haven't dealt with the initial problems, then of course, again, you're only basically chipping at the edges, which will never really work in a cohesive manner. So I will say thank you to everyone for joining and listening to this live. And I know that lots of people listen to this as a recorded podcast. So thank you for your time. And hopefully we will look forward to the next conversation next week. So I will say good day to you all and bring young Andrew back. Okay, I think I'm back, which is all good. 43 minutes. Okay, so hopefully you guys enjoyed that chat from Chen. As usual, I've got no idea what he talks about, but I will probably listen to it a bit later. So from when I left, Joanna Courtney arrived. Hi, Joe. Good to see you on here. Tracy's just saying that her mother was 35 years old when her father died. He passed out drunk in a running car and carbon monoxide happened. Wow, 1974. A wonderful doctor gave my mother Valium and she's still on it and doesn't want to get off. I know this is the problem, Tracy. This is the whole thing, isn't it? Some of these drugs are really helpful initially, and they obviously can help people in the short term, but there should be a kind of timeline when they're kind of weaned off them. But if they're not weaned off them, then of course they do become addicted. And then of course they can't function without taking those sorts of things. But those sorts of drugs obviously stop you kind of being in the here and now, really, I guess, from that perspective. So it kind of doesn't really work longer term. And I think a lot of older people, some of which I know actually have been given quite strong drugs over the years for traumas and things, but 30 years on, they're still on them. And of course it impedes their life, means they can't do very much because they have these very strong painkillers or addictive drugs that they're taking. Okay, Matsumi's here. Hi Matsumi, good to see you or hear you. Medical system procedures have in my mind through decades regard to animal health. Oh, right, okay. Yeah, so thank you for that, Matsumi. We're talking about agreeing with Chen about the current system. Yeah, I guess Chen probably covered that quite well. Okay, folks, I think from my perspective, we're probably done. So thank you guys for joining. Hopefully you enjoyed the chat. And we'll look forward to Chen's next week, Conversation Drugs Part 2. Okay, so from myself and Jane, and obviously from Chen, we'll say goodbye. And we'll catch you again later. Cheers, folks. Bye-bye.